For today's video, we have finally gotten our hands on the 2019 Hyundai Veloster. The Veloster is, I think, the most interesting Hyundai product for the 2019 model year. Not just because of the turbocharged model that we're looking at here, but what's coming up soon. 2019 brings us an all-new version of the stylish and sporty subcompact vehicle that we've seen in America for some time, but it also is the birth of Hyundai's new performance brand. I know this is going to sound a little bit strange, but the N brand from Hyundai is likely going to be the corollary to the M brand from BMW. That's because the Hyundai Veloster N is not just the model that we're looking at here with a bigger engine jammed under the hood. They've actually made some pretty significant changes to the vehicle overall to support that new engine. But today we're here to talk about this version, which is the 1.6-liter turbocharged version. So let's dive right on in. Base Velosters will make do with halogen headlamps, but the model that we're looking at has the up-level LED headlamps. Those are standard on the turbo. We have basically the same sort of grille design that we see in the rest of the modern Hyundai lineup. We have kind of a little kink there to give it a little bit more visual interest. No fog lamps down below, but we do have a radar sensor right there behind that Hyundai logo. The radar sensor is there because unusually for a subcompact mainstream car in America, we do have radar adaptive cruise control available in the Veloster. Base models come with a standard automatic emergency braking system. There's a camera right here behind the windscreen that's enabling that technology. And then the model that we're taking a look at here has all of the latest active safety gadgets available from Hyundai. You'll see those on the side of your screen. Those include the latest radar adaptive cruise control system, but you won't find that on the manual transmission model. You do have to get the DCT in order for that particular option to happen. Before we go on, we need to talk about what the Veloster is and what it isn't, because it is something of a unicorn, and even some reviewers have troubles seeing exactly what this vehicle is. This is a subcompact hatchback. This is not a compact hatchback. That means that this is a full 10 inches shorter than a Honda Civic. And I'm not talking about the Civic sedan, I'm talking about the shortest Civic, and that would be the Civic Coupe. The Veloster is also a full 6 inches shorter than a Kia Rio sedan and even 2 inches shorter than a Mini Clubman S. The closest corollaries to the Veloster in America would be entries like the Kia Rio hatchback, the Ford Fiesta hatchback, and other subcompact vehicles, because this is again a full size smaller than something like that Civic. And as a result, this is a 3-door vehicle. We have a tiny little door right back there, but not one on the other side. Part of this is obviously a styling choice because they wanted to make this look like a 2-door hatchback, but they wanted to give it a little bit of extra practicality. Now, if you're in a right-hand drive country, the door doesn't move. It stays over here on the right side of the vehicle. The side benefit is that it gives the driver a larger door to get in and out of that side of the vehicle a little bit more easily than the passenger right here on this side. And this is a hatchback, so we actually have a hatch right here rather than a trunk, but it's not terribly vertical. It actually is a little bit raked forward to give it more of the impression of a subcompact coupe. When you put it all together, you realize that there really is nothing else like the Veloster in the US at this time. It's even more obvious when you take a look at the previous generation of the Veloster. Its closest relative was actually the Kia Soul, the very boxy subcompact vehicle from the Hyundai Kia conglomerate. And that same sort of thing goes on for this Veloster. This is not really related to the Hyundai Elantra. Understanding the Veloster's category is, I think, really critical when it comes time to compare this with other options that you may be cross-shopping, because I completely understand that shoppers might want to cross-shop this with something like the SI Coupe or even a Hyundai Elantra Sport. And of course, because the Veloster is a very style-forward vehicle in this subcompact segment, you could even compare this to a number of different mini models. Remember that when making comparisons between this and some of those other options, you're comparing across segments. And so while you could cross-shop something like a Veloster to a Civic Si, that's going to be similar to cross-shopping a Hyundai Elantra and a Honda Accord, because they're not really in the same segment with one another, even though some people may be cross-shopping them when they're car shopping. Out back, we get LED tail lamps. These are combination modules. Not everything is an LED. We get these central twin exhaust tips, which we've seen in the last Veloster as well, and then aero treatments out back. This is definitely a style-forward subcompact vehicle. So thematically, this is also quite different than the other subcompacts we find in America, like the Ford Focus or the Kia Rio. Unusually for a subcompact vehicle in America, we have 3 different engines under this hood. Things start out with a new 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that runs on the Atkinson cycle to give you better fuel economy. That engine produces 147 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. You'll get 28 miles per gallon if you get the base 6-speed manual, 30 miles per gallon if you get the 6-speed automatic. Then we get this engine right here, which is a 1.6-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. This has been one of my favorite engines from Hyundai lately. You can see this in a wide variety of their products. This is the smallest vehicle that they're sticking it in for America, however. It produces 201 horsepower under this hood and 195 pound-feet of torque. You can mate it either to a 6-speed manual transmission, which will give you 29 miles per gallon combined, or a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, which gives you 30 miles per gallon combined. That's what we're driving today. I have to say, that's my favorite combination for this engine as well. Coming soon, there is going to be a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine that will give you either 250 horsepower or 275 horsepower, still again in a subcompact vehicle. Torque comes in at 260 pound-feet of torque, and fuel economy hasn't been released for that particular model yet. Expect us to be able to drive it probably in about 4 or 5 months from now. As far as the subcompact category goes, I'm going to give these front seats 10 out of 10 points. These are very comfortable when pitted against things like the Fiesta or the Kia Rio. We have a 2-way adjustable power lumbar support, which I think is a really great touch, even though the rest of the motions of this seat are manual. We also get a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. As with most relatively inexpensive vehicles in America, the front passenger seat is manual and it does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Hopping into the back is a little bit easier than in something like a Civic Si Coupe because we have this third door over here on the passenger side. Now remember that getting in and out of the vehicle for the front passenger is going to be a little bit trickier than the driver because that front door is a little bit smaller. And that was so they could actually give us this door over here on this side. Because of this sloping roof profile that we have in the Veloster, headroom in the back is not as generous as we'd find in some of the subcompact hatchbacks that are a little bit squarer, something like that Ford Fiesta. But legroom is still relatively generous. This front seat is moved all the way back in its tracks, suitable for a 6'5" passenger, and I could just almost stick my feet right there behind the seat. The Veloster is a 4-seat vehicle only, so there is no center seat right there. I'm going to skip right across that and go over here to the driver's side. Sitting right here behind myself, I have about an inch of legroom left. As far as small sporty vehicles go in America, this is more practical than a small 2-door would be, but obviously less practical than a 4-door or 5-door vehicle in this segment. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion, but you'll notice because of the overall dimensions, I would have to move that front seat forward in order to get the rear seat back to fold down. The 3 doors aren't the only thing a little bit different about the Veloster. We also have 3 power windows instead of 4. Thanks to the hatchback design, we find just under 20 cubic feet of storage space in the Veloster. That's relatively similar to some of the subcompact or even some of the compact crossovers that you might want to cross-shop this with, and definitely more than the average sedan. Although the hatch is definitely raked forward, this opening is almost at a 45-degree angle, we still have enough room back here to put 22-inch roller bags in this upright position and still close this lid. However, you will have to take this cargo divider out. This is a hard cargo divider, as you can see right there, and it unlatches from either side. Now, unlike the roller dividers, you would have to find somewhere to put that divider, so that is a little bit less convenient than some of those other designs, but you actually have enough room back here to line 22-inch roller bags up right like that and still close the hatch. So this is quite practical when it comes to overall cargo capacity. Moving in a little closer, you'll really notice how square this cargo area is. We have the subwoofer that's optional right over there on that side. And if I lift up the load floor, we actually have a temporary spare tire under the load floor. That surprised me a little bit because this version of the Veloster now has an independent suspension, and that generally takes up a little bit more room in the back of a vehicle. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in essentially a fully loaded Veloster, although again, this is not the Veloster N yet. We have this large moonroof that extends over the driver and front passengers' heads. It's not a panoramic design, but like many panoramic moonroofs, it has a power shade. Since the vehicle is not symmetrical, the shoulder belt design is not symmetrical for the driver and front passenger. We have a fixed height one over there on the passenger side, and you'll notice it is actually definitely in front of that seat if that seat is moved all the way back in its tracks. We have 2-way adjustable headrests, leather upholstery with aggressive side bolstering, a red stripe right there in the middle, and aggressive bolstering on the seat bottom cushion as well. Over here on the driver's side, we have a fixed height shoulder belt as well, but then we have this little retention mechanism right here, which is very similar to what we see in a lot of coupes and convertibles to help pull the shoulder belt a little closer to the driver. As we look around the interior, you'll definitely notice that this is a subcompact vehicle, not a compact vehicle, because the parts inside this cabin are generally made from hard plastic. We don't have as many soft touch points as we'd find in the next category up. This is another area where you have to remember that, again, this is not the same size as a Honda Civic. That's where the Hyundai Elantra comes into play. And really the direct corollary to the Honda Civic Si is the Elantra Sport. The glove compartment is a fairly large bin-style compartment. I had no problem fitting larger tablet computers inside. In the center of the dashboard, we have the latest version of Hyundai's infotainment software, which offers Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. The standard screen is a little bit smaller than this, but it also offers those standard smartphone connectivity features. We have a center channel speaker right there behind that screen in our model. And unlike compact vehicles, we have a single zone automatic climate control below these direct access buttons that integrate with that infotainment system. There's a keyless go button right over there on that side. Below those climate controls, we have a single USB input, 2 different power ports, and then we have a Qi wireless charging mat right down there below. You can see my phone is currently plugged in via the USB connection. Working our way back from there, we have a drive mode button. This allows you to cycle between normal, sport, and the smart mode, very similar to what we see in other Hyundai vehicles. A button to turn off the traction control system, heated seat controls, then a pretty typical console shifter. Drive is all the way back like that. The sport mode is over to the left. You'll notice we have a little light there that indicates that we are now in drive sport. And then if you want the manual mode, we toggle up and down for that. Between the front seats, we find 2 large cup holders, a pretty typical handbrake right there, and a padded center armrest that opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment for a small vehicle like this. On the driver's side, we have an instrument cluster very similar to other Hyundai models with white numbers and red needles on black faces. We then have a multifunction display in between that gives us things like turn-by-turn navigation directions if you have that option, the vehicle's active safety system status, the ability to change certain vehicle settings, and of course your trip computer. As we see in the Hyundai Kona, we have a flip-up heads-up display. So this image is being projected on this sheet of plastic, not on the windscreen. This is very similar to what we see in a lot of different mini models. We have our speedometer right there in the middle, just as you'd expect, but we get a very nice touch if I move this vehicle into drive and then push it over into the sport mode. We get this really attractive tachometer there. We also get the gear indication to tell you what gear you're in. This is one of the more attractive flip-up heads-up displays that I've seen, and I really hope that Hyundai brings especially this tachometer feature to more of their vehicles with heads-up displays. The steering wheel is one of Hyundai's round designs. We have sport grips up top, paddle shifters on the back, there's down over here on the left, and up over here on the right. On the left side of the steering wheel, we have our infotainment controls, volume up, down, track up, down, mode, voice command, and then phone buttons. On this side of the steering wheel, we have the buttons for the adaptive cruise control system, and then this button and this toggle control that multifunction display right there between the speedometer and tachometer. Because the Veloster is hard to categorize even before we get it out on the road, once we get it out on the road, it's also difficult to talk about how this compares. This does remind me a little bit of the Honda Civic Si, although this feels smaller out on the road. Overall curb weight is not that much different between this and the Honda Civic. This is something that I've noted in vehicles before. When you actually look at the numbers, because of modern crash test standards, the kind of equipment that we demand in the cabin of a vehicle, subcompact vehicles, compact vehicles, and even mid-size sedans don't really vary that much in terms of overall curb weight. This is right about 3,000 pounds. You can actually get a Honda Accord or a Nissan Altima that's right about this same curb weight. But overall, this is definitely smaller, and it feels smaller out on the road. It definitely feels narrower than something like a Honda Civic, or really anything else in that compact sedan category. In a lot of ways, the other vehicle that comes immediately to mind when you're behind the wheel in the Veloster is a Mini Cooper, and that's a very good vehicle to be reminded of, because this vehicle starts at $18,500, and this is about half the price of the average Mini Cooper in America, and you can get your Mini Cooper well on up into the $50,000 range if you get carried away with options. So this is significantly less expensive, but the overall feeling out on the road is actually very, very similar. That's likely because Hyundai has managed to steal away a number of important design engineers from some of the German brands, and that's really obvious in the way that this vehicle drives out on the road. It has a very Germanic feel to it overall. You can also thank the all-new independent rear suspension for this, because the last generation Veloster felt really poised at sort of 9/10, and then if you started pushing a little bit harder, especially on broken pavement, the rear suspension would start feeling a little bit unsettled. But this version never really feels that way. With that out of the way, let's move on to the numbers. 0 to 60 in this version happened in 6.9 seconds. That's basically the same as the last Veloster that we tested. That's because the engine and the transmission are basically the same as that last turbo model. That puts the Veloster a little bit faster than the Kia Soul, which also has basically the same engine and transmission under the hood, and a little bit slower than the Honda Civic Si. Now, the Civic Si is available only with a manual transmission, so your 0 to 60 times will vary depending on how skilled of a manual driver you are. But this vehicle will always be running those same 0 to 60 times because this has a 7-speed dual clutch under the hood. Personally, I like the way dual clutch transmissions feel, but they do feel like a manual transmission in some situations. You can get rollback if you're on a hillside, and low-speed crawl situations when you're in stop-and-go traffic can feel a little bit less refined than a traditional automatic. On the flip side, we have a vehicle with an automatic transmission that is just about as fast as a Ford Fiesta ST, and actually faster than most of the mini models with the S engine under the hood. When it comes to our braking score, we ran from 0 to 60 in 112 feet in the model that we're driving right here. This has 225 with tires on it, but not the summer tires which are available. In kind of an interesting twist, Hyundai offers a wide variety of different performance levels in the Veloster, and those performance levels affect not just the acceleration like the turbo engine under this hood, but also the way this vehicle handles. In addition to the tires that are on this vehicle, we can get Michelin Pilot Sport 4s, or we can get Pilot Super Sports, and you can even get Pirelli P0s, which are actually usually the domain of expensive luxury cars. You can also get 235 with tires. You'll find those on the top-end Veloster N trim, which will obviously stop shorter than what we're driving right here. This stopping distance is a little bit longer than the last Civic Si that we tested because that Civic Si did have wider tires. It was also more expensive than what we're driving right here. In terms of overall handling, I'm going to have to give this an A. The overall handling feel, I think, drops behind the Honda Civic and certain mini models, but just by a hair. This delta between those and the previous generation Veloster was much larger, and in this generation of Veloster, it actually is very, very small. The steering is quick, it's accurate, it's easy to tell exactly what this vehicle is doing, and the grip level is really, really amazing. But more than that grip level, because the last generation Veloster had grip as well, is the overall refinement of this suspension. Now, this suspension is unquestionably firm. We do get an awful lot of these small road imperfections coming into the cabin, but the overall tuning is well balanced, and it doesn't feel upset over broken pavement when you really start pushing the car harder in corners, etc. This remains well composed. As I typically say though, handling and ride are two ends of the teeter-totter, so when it comes to overall ride quality, I'm going to have to give this particular model a C, because this is definitely on the firm side. We're told to expect an adaptive suspension in the top-end Veloster N trim, so you may actually find a smoother ride in the Veloster N if that suspension is in its most compliant setting, and likely definitely firmer than what we're driving right here if it's in its firmer setting. So if you are looking for something that's tuned on either side of this, then the Veloster N could be a good option for you. In terms of cabin quietness, this scored 74.5 decibels, which makes this fairly loud for a subcompact or a compact vehicle. Now, that is a little bit logical because we do have tires in this vehicle that are oriented towards performance and handling, and we also have a vehicle that is relatively inexpensive. Again, this starts at $18,500, so you shouldn't expect that much more sound deadening in this than something like a Toyota Yaris or a Mazda CX-3. One of the oddities with designing a modern car is that vehicles like this, a Honda Civic, a Honda Accord, or a Hyundai Sonata, not only are they going to weigh similar amounts, but they're not necessarily going to cost that much different to build. So building this vehicle is appreciably the same as building a Hyundai Elantra, but logically you can't sell this vehicle for quite as much. As a result, manufacturers will sometimes have to cut features and functions on smaller vehicles like this in order to help drop the price and make the smaller vehicle less expensive than the bigger vehicle. One of those trade-offs in the Veloster definitely seems to be sound deadening, because we get more noise out of that 1.6 liter engine under the hood and we get more tire noise in the cabin. Hyundai's 1.6-liter turbo is a little bit less refined, I would say, overall. Definitely a little bit less refined in terms of the overall engine sound versus Honda's 1.5-liter engine, but fuel economy has always been excellent with this engine and especially this 7-speed dual-clutch transmission. This vehicle is EPA rated for 30 miles per gallon, which is awfully good for a performance subcompact vehicle like this. And you'll actually be getting better fuel economy in this than many of the Honda vehicles with their 1.5-liter turbo and the continuously variable transmission. That is something that we've also noted in some of the other vehicles that Hyundai makes with this same engine and transmission under it that compete with Honda's 1.5 and their CVT. We've been averaging about 32 miles per gallon in mixed driving, which is better than the EPA says we should be getting, despite the fact that we have been driving the Veloster pretty hard. More impressive than that seems on the surface is the amount of engagement we find out of this drivetrain, because this feels like a manual transmission. We have that very linear feel. When it's in a gear, we don't have a torque converter messing things up, making things feel a little bit mushy, and the gear shifts definitely feel very crisp. As with any small displacement turbocharged engine, there's not a lot of engine braking going on here, but we still have that same direct connected feel when you're in this gear, for instance second gear, and you wiggle your foot on the throttle. It feels very much like a manual transmission vehicle. And we have the shift paddles on the back of the steering column that are fairly direct and quick acting. Overall, I'm really impressed with the Veloster out on the road, but to be honest, I expected to be, because I liked the last generation of this car, even though some people gave it a hard time for having a non-independent rear suspension or having a few corners that were obviously cut on the inside or on the outside. But the Veloster in turbo format has always delivered a high level of performance for a relatively small amount of cash. We also have excellent fuel economy, high reliability, and a definite style-forward design. This is the kind of vehicle that you either love or hate, and I really appreciate that in this segment because there are a lot of Me Too vehicles out there. A lot of sedans are very conformist looking, but this doesn't really look like anything else out on the road. I also appreciate the fact that this generation of the Veloster really can be described in the same sentence as a Mini Cooper. And that's not something that we could say of the last Veloster. The last Veloster, you'd say it's a really good value compared to a Mini, but performance and handling is maybe 80% of that Mini. This vehicle not only is the handling ability and handling feel almost there with the Mini Cooper, we'll actually be getting a lot more power under the hood in the Veloster N. So if you want to knock the socks off of a Mini Cooper JCW, you'll be able to do that very soon in your Hyundai Veloster. The Veloster is something of an oddity in America, and as a result, comparisons are a little bit tricky. It's a subcompact 3-door hatchback, but it's also a sporty subcompact hatchback, which is why the base price of $18,500 slots it between entries like the Kia Rio hatch, which starts at $14,200, and the Honda Civic hatch, which is a size category up, but starts at $20,650. That base price in the Veloster gets you the 2-liter engine and the 6-speed manual transmission. Unlike most subcompacts in America, the Veloster has a slightly bigger engine in base form and more power than most of the other base subcompacts in America. It's one of the differentiating features. But we also have a much more elegant suspension setup, better handling, better performance all the way around, and a more engaging feel in even that base model. If you want to get the next step up in the lineup, that would be the Turbo R-Spec with the 1.6-liter turbo and the manual for $22,900. If you want the 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, and I would say that you definitely want that particular transmission, that would be at least $25,400. The DCT-equipped 1.6 is going to be the fastest way you can get that engine. The 1.6 with the DCT is going to be notably quicker than the 6-speed manual from 0 to 60, and I think that's what most people are going to be interested in there. If you fully load your 1.6-liter turbocharged Veloster, you will end up definitely within the range of the Honda Civic hatch at $28,150. That is one of the troubles with the Veloster when you look at its overall pricing outside of its very narrow window. When you start taking a look at some of the things that you can get in the compact category that are going to be relatively similarly priced to especially the top-end trims of the Veloster. Now, if we take a look at the totally bonkers Veloster N, there really is, again, no parallel to this model, but it'll start at $26,900 for the 250 horsepower version. If you want the 275 horsepower version, that's $29,000. That's notably less expensive than something like a Volkswagen GTI in its upper-end trims, something like the Honda Civic Type R, but again, we have a smaller vehicle. In the mainstream segment, really the closest thing you could get to the Veloster would be a Ford Fiesta ST. Well, it's still around because Ford is planning on killing that model in America. And that's because something like a Toyota Yaris, a Honda Fit, a Nissan Versa, they're just not the same thing as the Veloster. The Fiesta ST uses a 1.6-liter turbo, much like we find under the hood of the Veloster. It produces a little less horsepower and a little bit more torque, but overall it's very comparable. Now, the Ford does not give you the option of having an automatic or an automated manual transmission like we do see in the Veloster, so it is going to limit its appeal to a certain segment of buyers. You can only get the manual transmission in that vehicle. Hyundai obviously designed the Veloster to be a performance-oriented car, but they also designed it to be able to be driven by a wider group of people out there, and that's why we see that DCT under the hood. In addition to that, Hyundai was not looking at the 1.6-liter turbo Veloster as the pinnacle of Veloster performance. So you aren't going to get the rock hardest suspension, the most aggressive anything in that particular model. That's where the Veloster N steps in. Whereas on the Fiesta ST, that really is the pinnacle of the Fiesta lineup. As a result, the Veloster is a little bit more comfortable, it's a little bit more livable in daily driving, and again we have that automated manual transmission. Although we do have that firmer suspension in the Fiesta, it doesn't actually end up handling better than the Veloster, and the ride definitely suffers from that. Due to the overall age of the Fiesta and its overall lower price tag at the very beginning of its range, it doesn't feel quite as premium as the Hyundai either. Our next competitor, and the last competitor really in my mind for the Veloster, would be moving up to something like a Mini Cooper two-door hardtop. Both are very style-forward hatches. However, we don't find the third door option in the Mini, so it ends up being a tiny bit less practical than what we see in the Hyundai. The Mini is trying to be more of a premium vehicle than a mainstream vehicle, so we do see that on the inside of the Mini, that some of the fit and finish, some of the parts, etc. are going to feel more premium than what we find in the Hyundai. But interestingly enough, Mini is also targeting a low sticker price in that vehicle, especially in the very, very base trim, so it doesn't actually start that much more expensive than the Hyundai. It starts at $21,900. Now for that base Mini model, you actually get less power than we find in the base model of the Veloster. And we see something similar as we go on up the ladder. The Cooper S gets you similar performance, although it does have a little bit less power. The top-end JCW version has less power than the top-end Veloster N version as well. On the surface of things, this doesn't appear to be a very fair matchup, matching a Mini model to a Hyundai model, but I actually think that the Veloster does very well here. It is unquestionably a little bit less expensive overall, and the interior doesn't feel quite as premium, but the Delta is actually closer than you might think. It's also worth noting that although you can get a lot of premium features in the Mini, it will end up costing you significantly more for similar performance. And overall handling ability is not actually going to be better in those top-end trims of the Mini versus something like the 1.6-liter turbo Veloster or the 2-liter turbo Veloster N. In a nutshell, the Veloster is a fun and definitely style-forward subcompact vehicle. This is the kind of car that you would want to buy if you're willing to trade some of the practicality that we see in something like a Kia Rio or a Kia Soul or a Ford Fiesta for the extra style that we see in the Hyundai Veloster. We also gain a little bit more handling ability and definitely better handling feel and overall suspension dynamics in the Veloster. But we lose the practicality that we find in the average subcompact vehicle in America. You also have to be willing to give up a little bit when it comes to overall fuel efficiency. This is kind of a tricky category because for the price that you pay for a Veloster, you could buy something larger in the compact segment. So you have to really want something this particular size with this kind of feature functionality or this particular style, because it is styled very uniquely and differently than that next category up, which is going to be full of 5-door hatches, not 3-door or 2-door hatches. And lastly, you again could look at this as a value alternative to something like a Mini Cooper. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. If you haven't already commented on this video, please do now. You can also click over to those related videos on your screen. Find us over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos. And if you want to support this channel, there's a link up there at the top of your screen. Click that, you'll be taken over to patreon.com where you can support us on a monthly basis. I'll see you next week.